whatsoever that I'm going to get through all of this today. Okay, so bear with me. Okay, I will try to go as quickly as I can. And in the event that there's anything that's absolutely essential that I miss, we will start with this tomorrow, and I will go over the last little bit of it briefly tomorrow before you get turned loose to do a reading and a short response. That short response tomorrow is over a very, very short news article. It's like 3 or 4 pages. Okay? And it's really just a practical application of federalism, which is what we're going to cover today. Alright, so. Yes. There's a review on D2L already. Alright, so federalism, I need you to understand this. Federalism it's an ism, meaning it's a way of thinking, right? It's an ideology. Okay? This is a political ideology, it's a governmental ideology, not so much political, it's governmental in the sense that it is a separation of powers between a national government or some sort of central government and then some sort of regional governmental system. In the United States, we call this the federal government, right, and then state government. Although the reality is local government will get thrown in with state government as well, and there's some complexities that go through that because, the city of Houston can sometimes disregard what the state of Texas says, okay? It gets wildly complex, but I need you to understand that we're going to separate some power, right, between a central government and local governments, okay? Now, the alternative to a federal system is called a unitary system. Unitary means, or unit means one, right? Okay, so in a unitary system, you have a central government that dominates everything. Okay, if there are lower levels of government, they ultimately have no real power or authority. Okay, in the United States, because we have a federalist system, right, meaning we operate under federalism. When we look at the Constitution has a bunch of different types of powers. Okay, and the Constitution is going to play heavily on your test for Friday. Right? So anything and everything within the Constitution is fair game, and the reality is you're probably going to at least need to understand the Constitution predominantly in your own time. I don't actually make you read it from cover to cover anymore. I used to make students do that. Okay? But you need to understand the main ideas, right? You should have an idea of what the 7 articles are, right? You should have an idea of what the Bill of Rights is. Hopefully some of that is a little bit of review. Right? In the Constitution, we have expressed powers. Okay? Expressed powers are powers that are expressly stated. Okay? Sometimes expressed powers are also called enumerated powers. Right? If it's enumerated, that means that it's named. Okay? So the powers for the President of the United States come from Article 2. The powers for Congress come from Article 1, and really Article 1, Section 8, which lists off Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, raise an army, maintain a navy, yada, 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 yada. Okay? Implied powers are powers that are not expressly stated but are necessary and proper, right, in order to execute the expressed powers. Okay? So, best example I can give you of this. Congress has the power to make money, borrow money, spend money, raise money. Can they have a bank? Can Congress create a bank? Not according to the Constitution, they cannot. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say Congress shall have the authority to create a national bank. However, if they can borrow money, spend money, collect money, print money, do all of those things, it should stand to reason that they could create a bank as the functioning body for all of those things, yes? You understand that concept? And that would be an implied power, or that is an implied power as to how we typically understand implied powers. There are absolutely people that do not believe that a bank is ever proper, but it exists, okay? Article 6 is the Supremacy Clause, okay? So this matters to federalism because we're going to time we're going to get into, like, to be able to get into the specifics and the examples, right? But if the national government says one thing and the state government says another, the national government wins. Always, period, hands down. If there's a conflict between state law and federal law, national law wins. What that means is, look at marijuana as an example. The national government right now, right, and the Biden administration is asking the CDC to look into this, right, the FDA to look into this, the DOJ to look into it. They actually might be changing marijuana. Marijuana is currently a Class 1 drug in the United States. Do you know what that means? Class 1 is the worst of the worst. Okay? Heroin is a Class 2 drug. Better for you than marijuana.
Wait, what is?
Heroin.
Heroin?
Heroin is better than marijuana.
Heroin is better than marijuana.
According to your government, okay? According to your government, heroin is better than marijuana. The rationale is that heroin has medicinal purposes. Now, stop, because I know some of you are like, marijuana has medicinal purposes. Not according to the national government. That's the difference between Section 1 and Section 2, or Class 1 and Class 2. So, here's the thing. If you don't know, heroin is an opioid, right? Opioids that you're aware of would be like Vicodin, or Percocet, or morphine. Those are all opioids. Theoretically, like, if you were in Southeast Asia where they make heroin, right, and you got shot, you could take some heroin, and you wouldn't feel no pain no more from being shot.
If heroin is like worse than marijuana, then why do they use marijuana like medically?
The national government does not. State governments do. This is why this matters for federalism. Because here's the thing. Colorado and Washington were the first two to legalize marijuana. They did it a little over a decade ago. Okay? Since that point in time, the national government has still maintained that marijuana is illegal. And according to the Supremacy Clause, at any point in time, if the national government so desired, they could roll up into Colorado or Washington or any one of the other 24 states now that have legalized marijuana since that point, and they could arrest everybody, shut everything down, and throw you in prison. And you would have no recourse. Okay? That is the Supremacy Clause. Okay? Now, it doesn't happen, right, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is on your test, so you need to understand this. It doesn't happen because there is a concept called laboratories of democracy. Okay? One of the great things about federalism is we can allow a state to enact a plan to figure out, does that work? Because if it works, then maybe we want to do it everywhere, right? If it doesn't work, then one state has shown us, hey, this experiment didn't work, right? I'm going to give you an actual example of an experiment that didn't work. I believe it was Vermont, right? Around the turn of the century, Vermont decided that to try to decrease welfare payments, right, they were going to start drug testing welfare recipients. Makes sense, right? Pretty smart idea. I don't want to give my hard-earned tax dollars to crackheads. Right? Like, but I mean, seriously, if all you're going to do is go out and buy meth in, like, the mountains of Vermont, I don't need you to do that with unemployment money that's coming from my taxes. So Vermont was like, we want to drug test all welfare recipients. Right? And what did we find from that policy? It was a pretty stupid idea. Right? Why? Because it cost more to drug test everybody than what you saved not giving money to the drug addicts. Right? I'm just in this for the dollars. That's all I care about. Right? I don't want to spend $10, right, to save $5. That don't make sense. Okay, so that laboratory of democracy, Vermont's able to show the rest of the country, hey, it don't make sense to drug test welfare recipients, so they don't get drug tested. All right? That was slightly out of order for the PowerPoint, but I needed you to understand that concept because I'm like, hand to God, laboratories of democracy is going to be on the test on Friday. All right? Reserve powers powers are those powers reserved to the states, okay, meaning that they are not delegated to the national government or denied to the state government. Okay? Those powers come from the 10th Amendment, right? That's the idea. In fact, the 10th Amendment says anything not given to the national government or denied to states belongs to the states. And now again, in a federalist sense, and we'll get to this, that means there's all sorts of things that should be happening at a state level that do not happen in this country at a state level, right? Police powers reserved to state governments. They're going to regulate health, safety, right? That's why you drive from here to El Paso, and I think the speed limit in West Texas is like 85 miles an hour, yeah? Right? On the other hand, if you drive in California, the speed limit's never going to exceed like 70, right? And if you're pulling a trailer, it's 55 because California's just stupid. Okay? Concurrent powers are powers that exist at both the national level and the state and government level. Low-hanging fruit, easy example on that is taxes. Everybody gonna tax you because everybody wants your money. Got it? Okay? We'll skip that for a minute. Alright? Full faith and credit clause. Okay? Because this matters in a federal system. Okay? Full faith and credit is Article 4. Okay? If you have, most of us have a driver's license in the state of Texas, yes? Okay? If you want to go on vacation, right? You want to drive to New Orleans for vacation, right? How many of you have to stop at the state line and like you can't drive no more? So your Texas driver's license works in Louisiana? Yes! Yes! You don't have to stop at each state line and get issued a new driver's license, right? Full faith and credit, right? The other states are going to give you credit for the basic things that you get in the state in which you live in, right? Okay? My wife and I did not get married in the state of Texas. We are legally married in the state of Texas. Okay? So we get credit for our marriage that actually happened in Vegas. Weddings are cheap in Vegas. Weddings are way too expensive.
Did you have like an Elvis?
No, did not do the Elvis thing. Right? Privileges and immunities. Right? That means if you have a privilege, driving is actually a privilege. Right? So the privileges and immunities clause is actually driving is a better example of that. Right? Like you have the privilege of driving in the state of Texas. You understand you can lose that privilege, yes? Right? You get too many points on your license, they take your license from you. Okay? So there's that concept. Additionally, right, states can't discriminate against somebody from like another state. Right? So you cannot provide privileges only to your own residents. Which would again be like, if you're from Idaho, you can't drive in Texas. Like that doesn't work. Right? Now, I think her name is Kim Davis. I don't remember. I don't care about her name. That woman in that photo was a county clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue same-sex marriage licenses. Right? This goes directly into federalism and full faith and credit. Right? In the event that you are married in one state, other states should give you credit for that. Okay? Now, what also ends up happening with like privileges and immunities and federalism and whatnot, okay? National government reigns supreme, yes? Supremacy clause. If the national government says everybody can get married, right, gay, straight, whatever, then the states must abide by that. That's the supremacy clause. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, if we go back to the 10th Amendment says anything not given to the national government or denied to the states belongs to the states, which is typically assumed to mean licensing, which would include marriage licensing. Okay? Which is why this gets to be a wildly complex issue. Okay? If you ever really want to care, like if you want to know, I can fix this in like 3 seconds. Okay? So ask me sometime. What's happened over the course of time, specifically as it pertains to marriage, right? We had, in 1996, the national government created DOMA, right? So this was done under the Clinton administration, right? Hillary was a big fan of DOMA, right? DOMA is the Defense of Marriage Act. It denies anybody not a man and a woman from getting married. Eventually, DOMA is struck down in 2013. Eventually, we have Obergefell v. Hodges, which provides gay marriage protections for everybody. Okay? I'm gonna be honest with you, the real issue here comes down to like privileges. Right? Like, y'all know why I got married? I wanted the tax break. Right? I'm kidding, I love my wife, but I do get a tax break for it. Right? And I'm okay with that. I want the tax break for it. Right? Right? With that concept of privileges, right, if we're providing it for one group, kind of have to provide it for everybody else, or that's discriminatory, right? Which is essentially what happens here, right? Now, eventually, we'll get into like the fun question of how come polygamy is illegal then? Don't know what polygamy is? How come I can't have two wives? Like, why not? Polyamory, right? Polyamory is the loving of it. No, Mormons are not all polygamists. Okay, listen, because y'all probably have a Mormon friend. You just might not know you have a Mormon friend. They're not all polygamists, right? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not believe in polygamy. There's a different church called the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They believe in polygamy. That's a very small number of people. Okay, that's like the weird Mormons. Right? I do want to call your attention to this, right? Like, now, obviously I wouldn't test you on this because this is trivial, right? But 90,000 governments. Do you understand that? Like, there's 90,000 governments in the state. Do you understand that right now you are sitting in a government building? Who owns this building? Who? LCISD. The Lamar Consolidated Independent School District. The school district. Right? Where does the school district get its money from? Taxes. No, you actually go and pay attention to like the school board meetings. They decreased the property tax rate, the LCISD property tax rate, a month ago. You pay a little bit less in taxes to LCISD based on the value of your home as of like a month ago. Okay? Right? But that means that all of you right now, you have to abide by the national government, you have to abide by the state government, you have to abide by the county government, right? Because Fort Bend, we still in Fort Bend County yet? We're in Fort Bend County, right? Fort Bend County has a judge, KP George, right? KP George is basically the executive of Fort Bend County. KP George could come out tomorrow and be like, hey, everybody gotta wear masks again. Okay, you better put your mask on, right? And Dr. Nimitz could come out tomorrow and say that, and then you gotta put your mask on in this building, right? Joe Biden could come out and say that, now everybody gotta wear a mask everywhere. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different governments that you are responsible to or you fall under. Okay, now constitutionally, local governments don't exist, right? There's no provisions for local governments. Right? We have provisions for state governments in the Constitution. That would be like the 10th Amendment. Okay? Most of the time, it's national governments and state governments. There is a concept called home rule, and I want you to understand that. Home rule is basically the concept, the guarantee that really, really large cities are not going to be dictated to in most regards. Right? Like, y'all understand. New York City. You understand Manhattan? Just Manhattan has like 10 million people that live on that little island, yes? 10 million people live in Manhattan, right? And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that like the mayor of New York City, which would include like Manhattan and the Bronx and all them other boroughs, right? With their millions and millions and millions of people, right? Would have to take orders from the state government in New York the same way as like the mayor of Poughkeepsie does, right? Or some other podunk New York town, okay? Right? Large cities in America, San Francisco, New York, LA, Houston, Dallas, they have what is called home rule, right? are capable of passing and dealing with all sorts of laws and rules that can actually supersede what the state is saying. Okay? Now, historically, we do have to cover a little. I don't like covering history in this class necessarily, but we got to cover a little bit of history as it pertains to federalism, right? So we created a federal system in the United States. The system that we created was dominated by the states. Okay? Even after the Articles of Confederation, right? We had the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation sucked because there was all kinds of problems with it. Yes, right? No executive, unanimous consent to get anything done. Right? Can't make money, can't print money, can't tax. All kinds of problems with the Articles of Confederation. It's a weak government. So we create a new government with the Constitution that is a stronger government. Yet, even as we create a stronger government, we put into place federalism, and the states still maintain a significant amount of power. So for the first 150 years-ish of our nation, the states are dominant. The states are in control. That changes with the election of FDR and the Great Depression. Now, all of a sudden, the national government is going to take a more active role in what is happening. Okay? So, we used to have dual federalism, right? We understand dual just means two, yes? You are sitting in a dual class. This is both a college class and a high school class at the same time. You have different grade books in your class, yes? Okay? They're not the same. That's the concept of dual federalism, right? For dual federalism, we have this group over here, we have this group over here. Yes, it's similar, they're existing together, but there's some clear separations, right? Y'all understand that there's assignments that go in the college grade book that do not go in the high school grade book, right? There's weighting to the high school grade book that is not the same as the weighting to the college grade book, right? That's the idea of dual federalism. And at that point, the only thing that the national government does under dual federalism, the only thing the national government does is deal with the big stuff that can't be handled on the state level, right? That means like roads, because obviously if we build a road from, I don't know, let's just say Boston, Massachusetts up here, down to DC, we going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states, right? It wouldn't make sense for each of those 9 states to have to control it, right? That's something that the national government is going to control. Interstate commerce, foreign affairs, things that it's impractical for the states to cover themselves. That's what's going to happen. Okay? But for the most part, the day-to-day life is dictated and dealt with by the states. Right? The states are the ones that are responsible for civil law and for criminal law. Right? Civil law is contract law, criminal law is, you probably know what criminal law is, right? That's actually breaking the law, right? Civil law would be like a marriage, right? My wife and I have a contractual agreement, right? If she leaves me, she also gets to take half my crap. I don't know why I signed up for that. Alright? Article 1, Section 8, I think I mentioned a minute ago, this is where all your powers come from in Congress, right? Predominantly, number 1, power to regulate interstate commerce. This will actually be the clause that is utilized to expand federal power. Okay? So early on in United States history, if the national government needs to expand power, they're going to utilize the Commerce Clause to do it. Eventually, that's going to stop them. Okay? And we're eventually going to get to the point that the Commerce Clause, like we've superseded the authority of it. Right? But here, McCulloch versus Maryland is an example, right? The U.S. creates a bank. A state actually tried to tax the national bank, right? States cannot tax the national bank, right? Gibbons v. Ogden was, I believe it was a matter of like it had to do with like, I believe it was a waterway, right? And whether or not the national government could control the depth of a port, right? Because that's international commerce coming in, right? Or interstate commerce. I mean, the ship came from Boston down into the Chesapeake Bay. That's still interstate commerce. The national government gets to control that. And now what happens is a lot of times national government's behind on stuff like that. right? So if you go back to like early industrialization, you should have learned about it in your U.S. history class. Early industrialization, who do we see working? Everybody, to include children in child labor, right? Okay, so the national government is generally slow on the ability to make change or institute change. And now, I already told you the Great Depression is the massive change. In fact, I'll tell you right now, prior to the Great Depression, right, prior to the Great Depression, government was the cause of all life's problems. When the Great Depression hits, right, FDR now basically says government is the solution to all of life's problems. That is a massive, massive ideological shift in American political thought. Okay? But it is due to the fact that the 1930s is absolutely horrific. You see a 25% unemployment rate, right? You have people that had their savings in a bank, they lost all of their money overnight. Right? So if they had been smart, they were saving money, they had a decent job, they lose their job and their savings overnight, and they can't function, they can't even get the simplest of things accomplished. Okay? So the New Deal is a shift, and we go from dual federalism to a term we will call cooperative federalism. Right? There. I should have put this in way earlier. Dual federalism, cooperative. Anybody here like to bake? You know what a layer cake is versus a marble cake, yes? Yep. Okay? In a layer cake, you have a layer of chocolate cake, and then you have a layer of yellow cake, or strawberry cake, or vanilla cake, or whatever, right? If a lot of wedding cakes, right, are tiered, right? Like my wedding cake was 3 tiers, and I don't even remember. I don't remember what the flavors were, right? But all 3 of them were different flavors, yes? Right? One of them had raspberry. That's all I remember. Okay? Cooperative federalism is the idea of a marble cake, right? And if you don't know anything about baking, when you make a marble cake, you basically have your chocolate batter and then like your white cake batter, and you just mix them together and then pour them into the pan together, and they just mix in with one another. And so you will have like little ribbons of chocolate or vanilla or whatever, right, running throughout the cake. There's not clear boundaries that you have, right? So under cooperative federalism, we're going to lose those clear boundaries that used to exist under dual federalism, right? Now, what happens, right, is during the New Deal, the United States government is going to begin to issue grants. This becomes really important because grants are funds going from the national government to the state government. There's a bunch of different kinds of grants, right? But basically it's the idea that the national government is now going to be providing financial aid to the states and to social programs within the states in order to benefit the people theoretically, right? So there are categorical grants, and what generally happened is we had categorical grants early on. And so your categorical grants would be grants that went to programs where during the New Deal, like you actually understand during the New Deal, like as bad as that depression was, some really, really good things came out of it, right? We had the building during the Great Depression of massive numbers of hydroelectric dams, right? So we basically stopped up a bunch of rivers, right? We created lakes, right? And then the water flows out of the lake through the dam, turns a little turbine, we get electricity, right? So then we laid power lines, and now everybody in America has electricity, right? Because those are governmental programs, right? Like government is the one that has to be responsible for things like power lines, because it would not be feasible for all of us to lay all of our own power lines from the power plant to our house itself, okay? So, categorical grants would be things that are specific to some category, right? I.e., the electrification of the countryside, right? I.e., the creation of power plants, okay? The reality is a lot of our grants are categorical initially, right? And part of that goes back to that golden rule concept that was it this class that I taught the golden rule to yesterday? Yeah. right? It's the national government's money, so they're going to dictate the policy, right? That's the concept here of the categorical grant. They're going to tell you how you can spend it. Now, you've got a little freedom. If you're the state and a categorical grant, you have a little freedom, right? Like, if you get money in order to build a hydroelectric dam, you might be able to decide as the state where on the river you're going to create the dam, right? That way you can decide as the city, right, or as the state or whatever, right, you get to decide what town you're going to flood, right? Because that's the way that they created lakes. You got to flood somewhere, all right? And you'll actually see this on the test too, right? Over the course of time, grants have gone up, right? More money is coming back to the states are gaining a little bit more control, right? So the growth in categorical grants coincides with the growth of cooperative federalism, because now the national government is sort of getting involved in some of the state operations. They're providing some funds to the states on the things that the states can and cannot do, okay? All right, we already did that analogy, okay? Now, what happens is, right, we go through about a 50-year period, right, roughly a 50-year period of cooperative federalism, right? So this is the time where the national government has increased its scope, its authority with what it's doing, okay? And by the time we get to the 80s, we're going to get to something called the devolution revolution, right, where the national government is going to turn around and try to provide more authority or control back to the states, to try to get back to a more dual federalism ideology. They call that new federalism, okay? So really it's dual federalism, cooperative federalism, new federalism, all right? So during all of this, right, we want regular, or what we want to get to, right, is a little bit more regulation. We want a little bit more control, right? As the money is continuing to go up, Congress wants national standards to be met. They want national control over things, right? One of the things that ends up happening is Congress will actually even go so far as to create what are called unfunded mandates, right? Anybody know what a mandate is? Baker. Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Bye. You already knew, huh? Yep. All right. Bye. All right. Okay. So, with all of this, with this idea occurring in cooperative federalism, we also have preemption, right? Which basically just gives the national government the authority to come in and take over what's going on. And if the national government is unhappy as to how the state is running things, the national government can come in and take over. This exists not just on a national to state level, right? It exists on a state to local level, okay? Like you might realize the state of Texas has come and taken over HISD, yes? And preemption is basically the idea that if you have the implementation of policy that is not meeting the standards of the government can come in and do something about it, okay? Now, this is all a big blow to states' rights, and anybody that's a hardcore federalist, right, a federalist in the sense that they want federalism, they're opposed to a lot of the things that happened during the New Deal era and the 50 years that extend, right? States are beginning to lose their authority. They have to submit to more and more national laws. They lose their authority and their autonomy to do all sorts of things, okay? So instead, we end up with this larger concept of a one-size-fits-all policy within the United States, which I'm going to be honest with you, probably isn't great. If the U.S. really wants to, like, remain one nation, right, rather than 50 nations, they really need to get back to federalism, okay? That way, if California wants to allow for partial birth abortion all the way up to and including the day of delivery, okay, fine, California can do that. And if Mississippi wants to ban all abortions, period, under any circumstance, they don't even care if it's incestual rape, fine, right? Like, if you don't like that, try to convince your citizens otherwise, regardless of which place you live, yes? Okay? But the idea of a one-size-fits-all policy is really anti-federalist in the sense of what federalism is supposed to be, okay?
This allows for deviation between the states so that different states can afford to have different policies to better meet the needs of their individual citizens. All right? So, again, we're going to try to get back to this concept now. There's some obviously negatives to it, right? So when you have more governmental involvement, right, this is part of the reason why we get a civil rights movement, okay? Yes, it was the 1930s that all this starts, but by the time we get to the 60s and it's apparent that the national government is taking more authority, they're more in control of what's going on in the states, right, at an individual level, this allows for something like the civil rights movement, right? Because now the states have lost some of the autonomy, some of the authority they had before, right? Things like segregation, okay, which used to be just a state issue, right? If the state of Alabama wants to say that black people can't eat in this restaurant in 1950, well, that's a state of Alabama thing, right? Okay? The increase of cooperative federalism, right? The increase of national authority, okay, allows the national government to come in and dictate to states their behaviors more frequently. It should also make sense to you, right, when we go back to what I initially told you, the very first thing that the national government does to extend its powers pertains to federalism. It utilizes what clause? What? What's the clause that the Congress used to get more power? Commerce. The national government needs to regulate interstate commerce, yes? Right? Is somebody sitting at a lunch counter in, we'll use the Greensboro 4 as the example, right? Somebody, a black North Carolina A&T student sitting at a lunch counter at Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, is that interstate commerce? If I go to the Shell station down here after school and I buy gas, is that interstate commerce? Okay. The other option, it's not inter, it's intra-state commerce. You know what the difference is? Okay. International means what? Outside of the nation, right? Or occurring through multiple nations. Interstate commerce would be occurring through multiple states. Intrastate would be just inside the one state. Okay? So intra is contained, inter is expansive. Me buying gas at the Shell station, is that inter or intrastate commerce? It's intrastate commerce? So it's a wildly complex issue, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, there's not a clear answer. Different people, this is why politics exists, different people will have different beliefs as it pertains to this, right? So, is it intrastate commerce because, I don't know, does Shell have a refinery here in Houston? Anybody know? I know there's like Exxon Mobil, right? Like I know Chevron's got one over in Baytown. Yeah, so let's just use Chevron. If I go to a Chevron, right, the oil is offloaded in Baytown, it's refined in Baytown, it's sent from Baytown to Fulshire. Is that intra or interstate commerce? That might be intra, right? What if the Shell station is in New Orleans? Right, then it becomes inter. Well, but hold on, right, I bought my truck in Texas, but my truck wasn't manufactured in Texas. Right? My truck was actually made in another state. I drove my truck to the Shell station. Right? Therefore, it's interstate commerce. You still think it's intra? But it wasn't made here. The truck was shipped here from another state. To a dealership. I'm telling you, there's not a right answer here. Like, this is one of those things that's going to drive you crazy. It's part of how you define it. This is what, and I want you to understand, this is what was happening, right? And this is part of the reason why, like, states' rights defenders, part of the reason why people that are hardcore federalists are going to argue, well, if it's not clearly interstate commerce, then it has to be intrastate commerce, right? Because here's the thing, if you're actually confused, right, like, well, it's kind of interstate and it's kind of intrastate, how do you make a decision? Because eventually, that's what we're going to do in this class, is we're going to get to freedom of religion, right, in a couple of weeks, we're going to get to freedom of religion, and I'm going to blow your mind, right? Because freedom of religion says you can practice whatever religion you want, and the government can't establish whatever religion they want. Right? What happens when those two things are in conflict with one another? What wins? Is that Anthony? Or Rodney? Rodney's passed out? Alright. Okay. Sorry. Look, because this will probably be on the test as well. I need you to understand Lopez versus the United States. That actually happened here in Texas. Right? So Lopez versus the United States, the national government, Congress passed something called the Gun-Free School Zone Act, right? Can Congress regulate whether or not guns can be on campuses? So here's the thing. Congress said they could, and Congress said they could do it because it's interstate commerce, right? And here's the mental gymnastics that Congress went through, right? They said we can ban guns on school grounds, right? Because if there's a gun on school ground, then all of a sudden Hannah, is going to be worried, right? She's going to be a little scared because there's a gun on school grounds, and therefore she's not going to pay attention in class. Because she don't pay attention in class, she's not going to do as good in Baker's class. Because she don't do as good in Baker's class, she's not going to get into as good at college. Because she don't get into as good at college, she's not going to get as good a job. Because she don't get as good a job, now all of a sudden that's interstate commerce, isn't it? That's ridiculous. You understand? Like, at that point, that is utterly ridiculous. Okay? I'm not telling you that I think people should have guns on school grounds. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you that is not interstate commerce. Right? Like, I don't know how you can do those mental gymnastics. Okay? Eventually, by the time we get to the 1980s and 1990s, Congress is going to turn around and start going, not Congress, right? Government as a whole is going to start turning around and going in the opposite direction, right? Now we're going to go back to that concept, that old concept of federalism. We call this devolution, right? Do we know what it means to devolve? To go backwards, right? So devolution is the idea of going backwards, right? We started going forward where the national government had more authority. Now we're going to go backwards where the national government has less authority again. All right? What happens now, right, we had the categorical grants, yes? Very specific, right? The government was dictating. They said you would only use the money for this purpose. Now instead, the government is giving out block grants. Block grants are like, man, you can do whatever you want with it. Here you go. Here's $1 billion, right? Just spend it. Okay? Far more freedom as a result. This devolution revolution is predominantly a product of the 80s and 90s. When you talk about turning points in government, the only two that you need to know are the New Deal and FDR, and then basically I'm going to call it Reaganism, right? I'm going to call it 1980 and the election of Ronald Reagan, because prior to 1980 we had like 50 years of pretty much just straight democratic rule in the United States. Okay? So, I do want to at least call your attention to the fact that there's a whole bunch of issues that come from federalism, right? A whole bunch of inconsistencies. We've not really fixed it, even going back to devolution, we've not really fixed it. Okay? There's still all kinds of issues with accountability and control and things like that. Okay? Innovation and diffusion. Innovation is just the idea of being able to do new things, right? Like that would be the creation of charter schools, which now a whole bunch of different states have, right? Diffusion is basically the idea of taking something and applying it moving forward. I already told you what unfunded mandates were, right? I will post this. You'll be able to go through the last little bit of it on your own. But no, that's pretty much it, because I went through laboratories of democracy, because I didn't think I was going to get through this, and that's absolutely on the test on Friday. So we're good. Yes, everything is D2L, guys. So, again, I've recorded this, right? I will upload this. I will upload the video, so that way if you happen to fall asleep, like you can go watch the video, right? Or if you just
I talked too fast and you couldn't take notes.